Okay, so welcome back. My name is Ricardo Montoya. I am your teacher for the 5th and the 6th semester in the SEA at the University of Guanajuato. And we are going to continue checking all the things that we started with a few, well, a lot of episodes ago. I think by this point I have, by this time I have recorded pretty much like 30 something videos, and it's gonna take a little more even. So on the last class, on the last episode, on the last chapter, I hope that you're following them in order. We were speaking about modal verbs and semi-modal verbs. We started speaking about modal verbs for ability, capacity, possibility, permission. We were speaking about modal verbs for obligation or necessity. And then we were speaking about some modal verbs that also can mean future. They sometimes can mean future. Okay, so the thing is, well, we're gonna just do a little summarization. A summarization is like a resumen of everything that we have been checking. Yeah, this is a short list of the semi-modal verbs that we can use. This is a summarization of the modal verbs that we can use. The semi-modal verbs, sorry. These are semi-modal verbs. I'm sorry. I think this is not well calibrated. Yeah, semi-modal verbs. Okay, so how do they work? How do semi-modal verb works? We know that for ability, capacity, you know what? I'm gonna use the other two. For ability, capacity, and permission, we have be able to and be allowed, right? Be able to, if you remember, refers more than anything to capacity. Yeah, be allowed to refers to permission. If you have permission to do something, let me do it a little bit bigger, I think. Permission. Okay, we were saying that for ability, capacity, permission, possibility, we have the modal verbs can, could, may, and might. These two, may and might, are normally in questions when we request for permission. Requesting permission. The other two are very common for both capacity, ability, or permission. Okay, so we can do a little example. I'm going to be erasing the examples because otherwise it's gonna take a lot of space. So for example, with a modal verb, I can say I can jump. Yes, or I could, well, let's use a different subject. He could jump. So we have subject, modal verb, and verb in the base form. We don't really have a complement. The complement is optional. If you want to say something, you can say high, or I don't know, high. I can jump high, he could jump high. This is a modal verb of ability or permission. When you say I can jump high, it may mean that I have the ability to jump high or that I have permission to jump high. If you want to use the semi-modal verbs, you can use subject, the semi-modal verb be able to, and the verb in the base form, and again a complement, high. Or the semi-modal verb be allowed to, and then verb in the base form and complement. So they are a little different. You have your subject. This here is your, sorry, let me just try to make it a little bit more straight. This here is your semi-modal verb. and then you have your verb in the base form and your complement. Okay, so what is the difference? What is the difference between modal verbs and semi-modal verbs? Very easy. When you are using a modal verb to make a negative statement, is very simple. You just add can't or couldn't. Super easy. To make negatives, the modal takes the negative. How do you make questions? Very simple. The modal switches positions with the subject. It's first modal and then subject. So you say, can I jump high? Or you can say, could he jump high? Okay, very easy. Also, it's very easy because it doesn't matter who the subject is. It is always can and it is always could. Never cans, never coulds, never canning, coulding, coulded, nothing like that. The problem that you have is that both of these sentences are in the present, and you cannot change them to past or to future. Well, remember, could can be in the past if you have a time marker, something like when I was a kid, I could jump high when I was a kid. Okay, this could may be in the past because the context is in the past. But normally, if you don't have the context, if you don't have this, could is in the present. So both of them are in the present and none of them can be in the future. So what do we do with, well, present? What do we do with semi-modal verbs? They are a little bit more difficult because first, this part, the be part, this part, the be able to and the be allowed to, it has to be conjugated to the person. So if you want to use them in the present, I am is the verb to be in the present. I am able to jump high. He is allowed to jump high, right? This one is, again, used for capacity. I am able to jump high. It means I have the capacity to jump high. He is allowed to jump high. It means that he has permission to jump high. Okay, so that's pretty much the way that we're gonna use them. Let me just clear a little space right here. And then the problem is, how do we make questions or negatives? Your semi-modal verb is all of this. Is allowed to and is able to, all of it. If you want to make a negative, only the first part takes the negative. Only the verb to be takes the negative. The negative is not at the end of the semi-modal verb. In this case, yes. With modal verbs, it's just at the end. In this case, you have to just add the modal verb to the first part, to the verb to be. That's why the verb to be is very, very important. What happens if you want to make a question? Well, if you want to make a question, then you need only this part to switch positions with the subject. First, the auxiliary, they are in present, so this is like the auxiliary that they are using. Then the subject, and then the rest of the semi-modal verb, verb and complement. Am I able to jump high? Yes, you are. Sorry. Yes, you are, or no, you aren't. Is he allowed to jump high? Yes, he is, or no, he's not. Okay? Now, again, it is way more easy to use can or could. In this case, they are in the present. So all these sentences, they mean the same thing. There is, well, except this is in negative, but if it was in affirmative, these sentences, they all mean pretty much the same thing. I can jump high, he could jump high, I am able to jump high, he's allowed to jump high. All of them, they are pretty much the same sentence. So what is the point of using semi-modal verbs? The point of using semi-modal verbs is that you can change them to past or to future, right? So for example, if I want to make a sentence in the past, what do? The verb to be right here is conjugated in the present. Now I need to conjugate it in the past. In the past, we can say I was or he was. Remember, the verb to be in the past can be was or were. In the case of the first and the third person of the singular, you use was. I was able to jump high, he was allowed to jump high. You are saying that in the past, you had the capacity or you had the permission to jump high. with this, you can never say, you never say something like, I can't jump high. No, that doesn't work. No, it's not gonna work like this. You can say, I can jump high. No, 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 that's never gonna work. With this, they are in present, and that's it. You cannot change that. Them, the semi-modal verbs, this is the point of them, that you can use them to make, to change the sentence to the past. What happens if I want to change the sentence to, let's say, the future? If I want to say something in the future, well, if I want to say something in the future, the only thing I have to do is the verb to be. I just conjugate the verb to be to the future. What is the future of the verb to be? In the present is am, are, or is. In the past is was or were. In the future, we don't have a conjugation for the verb to be in the future, for any verb in the future, so we say will be. Will be. I will be able to jump, he will be able, or he will be allowed to jump. It means in the future, he will have the capacity to jump high. In the future, he will have permission to jump high, okay? If you wanna make them negative, the negative is with the will. He won't be able to jump high, okay? Or he won't be allowed to jump high. If you wanna make a question, again, will he be allowed to jump high? Will I be able to jump high? And that's pretty much it. This is the good thing about semi-modal verbs. Semi-modal verbs are really, really nice, because when you have semi-modal verbs, you can change, you can use, you can say, I don't know, you can express, for example, ability, capacity, or permission in different time tenses, in the present, in the past, in the future. Even you can do something weird, and you can combine them with modal verbs. For example, we have modal verbs for obligation, obligation. So what happens if I want to speak about ability or capacity or permission, ability or possibility, but I also want to speak about obligation? Well, I can use a modal verb for obligation. The modal verbs for obligation, I hope that you remember, are must or maybe should. And then be allowed to. Must be able to, must be allowed to. I must be able to jump high. I have the obligation of being capable. I am obligated to have the ability to jump high. You are using two different things. You are expressing obligation and you are expressing capacity. I am obligated to have the capacity to jump high. I must be able to jump high, right? He should be allowed to jump high. I mean, again, he has an obligation or a necessity to be permitted. There is an obligation that is permitted that he jumps high. Okay, so you can mix them. This is the very, very, very good thing about semi-modal verbs. They are way harder than modal verbs, but they are super flexible, and they are going to help you to communicate a lot of ideas that you wouldn't be able to communicate in a different way. Okay, again, well, these are these are modal verbs for permission. What happens if I want to use modal verbs for obligation? For obligation, I have different modal verbs. I have two semi-modal verbs, have to or have got to, and then need to. And as regular modal verbs, I have must, should, shall, and ought to. This one is kind of old and people say oughta, but again, this is like pretty, let's say, it's not really formal. It's actually pretty informal. So try not to use this one, but maybe you're gonna find it like that. So for example, let's do another example. This is just some more examples. With modal verbs, with must or should, you say, I must finish my homework. I must finish my homework. Or you can say, for example, you should tell your mom. Okay? So in this case, what I have, again, I have a subject, I have a modal verb, I have a verb in the base form, and then I have a complement. Yes? My subject is you. My modal verb is should or must. Yes? The verb is always in the base form, tell or finish. And then my complement is whatever extra information. In this case, it's an object, and in this case, it's another object. It's the thing receiving the action of being finished, the thing or the person receiving the action of being told. Okay, so this is super easy. When you have modal verbs, again, it's super easy because when you need to make them negative, it's just the modal verb takes the negative. Should, shouldn't. Must, mustn't or must not. You shouldn't tell your mom I must not finish my homework. Perfect. That's super good. If you want to make questions, the modal verb and the subject, they switch positions. So you say something like, should you tell your mom? Or must I finish my homework? You are making a question. If you want to make an information question, again, why must I finish my homework? I want to know the reason that I am obligated to finish my homework. Okay, so with modal verbs, it is really, really simple. You have your modal verb. It's never shoulds. No. It's never shoulded. Nope, that's impossible. It is always should. It is always must. The verb is always in the base form. And well, it doesn't matter who the subject is. You don't really have to conjugate the verbs. The problem is, again, as you may remember, the problem with these modal verbs is that they are only in the present. When you say, you should tell your mom, it means now. You should tell your mom now or normally or always. I must finish my homework. When? Now. So what happens if I want to express obligation or necessity, but I want to express it in the future or in the past? I want to say I or you or she, and then I want to use the future or the past. I never say I musted. No, I shoulded. No, I will must in the future. All of this is impossible. Yes, you can never conjugate modal verbs. You can never use two modal verbs at the same time. That's impossible. So what do? You need to use the semi-modal verbs. We have three semi-modal verbs. We have the semi-modal verb have. Sorry, let me just give it a little bit more space. Have, got, to. You have the semi-modal verb have to. So this got is like optional. You can say have got to or only have to. And then you have the one need to. Then you need a verb in the base form. Your verb in the base form is going to be something like, I don't know, for example, I have got to study. I have the obligation to study. I have to study, and she needs to study. And then a complement, the complement can be whatever, so more and more. This is just a complement of mode. It's telling you how much or how many or how little. Okay, so then we have subject. This is my subject, right? I have semi-modal verb or auxiliary. My auxiliary, I don't really have an auxiliary. What I have is a semi-modal verb. Then I have the verb. It is always in the base form. Study, 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 study. You don't have to change anything in there. And then your complement is whatever. In this case, this is a complement of way or how. They are explaining you how. So again, if you think about it, what you have is your subject, your semi-modal verb, your verb in the base form, and your complement. So what is the problem? Well, they are way more difficult. Number one, they are in the present. If they are in the present, the three of them, they need to follow the rules of the present. In the simple present, we don't have the auxiliary, and then we say have got to. So this is perfect. I have got to study more. That's perfect. You don't really have to change anything. You have to study more. Perfect. You don't have to say anything. But in the present, the third person of the singular has one rule. The rule is that the auxiliary is thus, but you never use it. And because you're not using the auxiliary, then the verb needs an S. She needs to study more. She has or he has got to study more. In this case, it's I, so you don't have to change. You, so you don't have to change. But when you have she, then you need to change. Okay? That's the first problem. The first problem is that we need to respect the rules of the simple present. Again, in the simple present, well, let's respect the rules of the simple present. It's not that difficult. So I have got to study more. You have to study more. She needs to study more. Perfect. Everything's okay. But the problem is, how do I make them negative? Do I say, instead of have, do I say haven't? I haven't got to study more. I haven't to study more. I needn't. What do I do? Nope. All of this is wrong. Because again, remember, the time tense is the present. These are in the present. What is the auxiliary for the present? Have is not the auxiliary for the present. The auxiliary for the present is do or does. I do, you do, he or she does, right? So when you make a negative statement, the auxiliary takes the negative. So you say, I don't, you don't, and she doesn't. In this case right here, we have the auxiliary does. So the verb doesn't need to have an S. You don't need to repeat the S. She doesn't need to study more. You don't have to study more. You don't have got to study more. This is the way it works. This is the problem with semi-modal verbs. Yeah, semi-modal verbs, they have a problem. Sorry, I've erased something that I shouldn't have erased. The the and the the. So the problem is that to use semi-modal verbs, you need to remember the rules. You need to remember the rules of the present. So if you want to make them in the present, how do you make questions? Again, your auxiliary changes positions with your subject. First auxiliary, and then your subject. First auxiliary, and then your subject. And then you have yes, no questions. Do I have got to study more? Yes, you have got to study more. Do you have to study more? Yes, you have to study more. Does she need to study more? Yes, she does. She does need to study more. Does it make sense? So the problem is that we need to respect the rules of the present. So it is way more easy, it is way more comfortable to use modal verbs. It's always easier. But the problem is, again, that these are always in the present. You cannot change that. In the other hand, these other ones, they can be in the past or they can be in the future. How do you do that? Well, it is very simple. The only thing that you have to do, okay, the only thing that you have to do is you have to change the semi-modal verb to the past or to the future. If you want to change them to the past, you don't say have got to. You say, sorry, let me change the color again. You say have got to. I have got to study more. So in this case, well, this is not a question. This is an affirmative statement. Okay. I always erase more of this. Yeah. So what you need to do is you need to change the verb to the past. You have to study more. She needed, right, to study more. That's perfect. So now I am saying that in the past, I have the obligation of studying more. Right now, I don't have the obligation, but in the past, in the last semester, in the last month, a few years ago, I had got to study more. I had the obligation, I had the necessity. You have to study more. You have in the past the obligation or the necessity to study more. She needed to study more, not now, in the past. She needed to study more. The problem is, how do you say this in a negative? Hadn't? No, because hadn't is the auxiliary of the past perfect, and this is not the past perfect. This is the simple. This is the simple past. This is the past. So what is the auxiliary for the past? The auxiliary for the past is did. Do you remember that? We never use it in affirmative, but when we have a negative, did takes the negative. Didn't, didn't, didn't. And what happens when I use the auxiliary? Very simple. When you're using the auxiliary, the verb doesn't need to be in the past. Didn't have to, or didn't have got to, didn't have to, and in this case, only like this. Didn't need to. I didn't have got to study more. In the past, I didn't have the obligation of studying more. You didn't have to study more. She didn't need to study more, right? How do you make questions? Again, you need the auxiliary. You need your auxiliary. And the auxiliary switches positions with the subject. Only the auxiliary switches positions with the subject. So you say, did I have got to study more? Did you have got to study more? Did she need to study more? And this is the only way to make modal verbs in the past. These ones, should, must, ought, shall, they are never going to be in the past. You need to change the semi-modal verbs. This is just the way it works, okay? And again, what happens if you want to use them? We're about to finish, don't worry. What happens if you want to use them in the future? What do you do when you need to use them in the future? If I want to say, in the future, I will have an obligation or a necessity to study more. If it is in the future, you never say, you will should. No. I will must. No. That's impossible. Should and must, they continue to be the way they are. What you have to change is the semi-modal verb. The semi-modal verbs can be conjugated to the future. Have got to changes to will have got to. I will have got to study more. Have to, I will have to study more. Need to, I will need to study more. Super simple, right? If you want to make them negative, only the will takes the negative. I won't have got to study more. I won't have to study more. I won't need to study more. If you want to make them questions, again, only this part switches positions with the subject. Your subject and the auxiliary of your modal verb switches positions, and then you have, will I have got to study more? Will I have to study more? Will she need to study more in the future? Okay? So again, this is the good thing about semi-modal verbs. They are more complicated in a way. I understand that they are more difficult. It is easier to use should or must and everything. But again, the good thing about them is that they are very flexible. You can express a lot of ideas with the semi-modal verbs, okay? Another thing that you can do is, for example, you can convey obligation and also possibility. How do you do that? Obligation and possibility. Well, the obligation is going to be the semi-modal verb, and the possibility is going to be a simple modal. So you can say, for example, I could have got to study more. I could have got to study more. Probably probably I have the obligation to study more. You have one modal verb speaking about possibility and one semi-modal verb speaking about obligation. Because you have this modal verb, this is always in the base form, have. Even if it was the third person, she could need to study more. You have your modal verb for possibility, you have your semi-modal verb for obligation, right? Because you have a modal verb, this is always in the base form. You never use the S. It's the third person, but you don't need an S because you have a modal verb, okay? I don't know, let's do something opposite. You should be able to study more. In this case, this modal verb is telling me it's telling me obligation. The modal verb is obligation, and the semi-modal verb is telling me ability or capacity. So I have the obligation to have the capacity to study more. You should be able to study more. I have the necessity of being able to study more. I have the necessity of having the ability or the permission or the possibility or the capacity. So you can change, you can switch them. This is the very, 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 very good thing about semi-modal verbs, okay? Remember, obligation or necessity, you can use should. This is obligation. And for ability or capacity, you can use be able to. This is be able to. So this sentence has both possibility and obligation. You should be able to study more. You have the obligation of being capable of studying more. This is the way everything works. And if you look at it, we are never breaking the rules that we stated at the beginning of the course. If they are affirmative statements, subject, modal verb, or semi-modal verb, verb in the base form, and complement. If you make them negative, couldn't, shouldn't, couldn't. If you want to make them questions, could I, should you, could she. And that's it. It is always the same. This is the good thing about English. I know it seems very difficult and hard, and I am not saying this is easy, but in the one hand, it is always the same. It is very predictable. Yeah, it is very predictable because it is used in the same way every single time. Then we have for the future, we have one. We have be going to. If you say something with be going to, it will be like, well, in the future, you can say, I will run more. Or you can use the semi-modal verb, I be going to run more. So again, what do you have? You have your subject, you have your auxiliary or your semi-modal verb in this case, then you have your verb in the base form, and then you have your extra information or your complement. So again, subject, auxiliary or modal verb, I mean, they are pretty much the same thing, verb in the base form, and complement. Yeah, will is very simple. Will is very simple. Let me just make this. Sorry, I think I need to do it a little higher, just like this. Will is very simple because if you want to make it negative, the only thing that you need to do is change will and use want. I want run more. Yes. If you want to make a question, you change the order of the modal and the subject. Will I run more? Yeah, very simple. This one is a little bit more difficult because this part, the verb to be, this part is super important because it has to be conjugated. I know that I am speaking about the future, but technically this semi-modal verb is in the present continuous. So you need to use the verb to be in the present. In the case of sorry, I need to use the black one. In the case of I am going to run more. This is super important. Why? Because if you want to make a negative, this takes the negative. I am not going to run more. If you want to make a question, this is the one that you change. Am I going to run more? So you use both of them, and they both mean future. Both of them are pretty similar. I know that sometimes in some classes, your teacher must have told you, some of your teachers have told you that you use will when you have like spontaneous decisions or things that you didn't really plan, and that you use be going to when you're speaking about like plans and things that you have been thinking about for a while. In a way, that's true. I mean, normally it is used like that. Normally when you have a plan or something that you have been thinking about for a while, you use be going to. Normally, you say something like, I am going to go on vacation next week. I am going to fly to Europe next summer. You try to say these types of things with be going to. And normally you use will for more spontaneous decisions. Like we are speaking and somebody knocks on the door. Excuse me, I will open the door. Or we are speaking and the phone starts ringing. I will answer the phone. I will answer the call. Normally it is like that, but it's not a super hard rule. Okay, so it doesn't, I mean, it's not as important as your teacher told you before. If you use will for plans, nobody's gonna tell you anything. I mean, it's not like next weekend I will go to the beach. No. It's I am going to go to the beach, because will is for spontaneous decisions. That doesn't happen. I mean, they are pretty much interchangeable. The real reason, the real possibility that you have with be going to, the real thing that you can do is that you can change the time. Instead of saying I'm going to, you can say was going to. What happens in this case, we are not changing the meaning to the past. This is still in the future, because if you want to change it to the past, well, use the simple past. You can say I ran more, and that's it. Or I was running more in the past continuous, or I have been running more in the past perfect continuous. So it doesn't make sense to change this to the past. What you are doing with this is you are doing something called a cancel future. Tomorrow I was going to run more. It means tomorrow this was the plan. Tomorrow is still in the future. I mean, it is not now. It is something for tomorrow. But tomorrow, the plan is canceled. Tomorrow I was going to run more, but now I have a different plan. Okay, so this is pretty much the way it works. And finally, just to finish with all of this, we have one more semi-modal verb that is only used for the past. In the past, we use the auxiliary did, so we say something like, I did go to school. The problem is, in affirmative statements, we never use the auxiliary, and because we don't use the auxiliary, we need to change the verb to past. I went to school. And we have the semi-modal verb, I used to go to school. Okay? So again, we have subject, we have an auxiliary, well, right here, used to or did. Well, one is an auxiliary, the other one is a semi-modal verb. We have a verb. In the case of the modal verb, it's in the base form. In the case of the simple past, well, you use it in the past. And then we have extra information. In this case, it's a complement of place. Yep. So what do we have again? We have subject, auxiliary, verb, and complement. Or in this case, subject, semi-modal verb instead of the auxiliary, verb in the base form, and complement. When you have modal verbs or semi-modal verbs, the verb is always in the base form. Now, what happens if you want to make them negative? Well, in negative, is a little different. If you want to make them negative, you use the auxiliary did to take the negative, didn't, and the verb doesn't have to change because you have the auxiliary, so you don't have to change the verb. I didn't go to school. In this case, what do we do? In this case, again, because this is in the simple past, we use the auxiliary to take the negative, didn't. And we don't use used, we use use. Didn't used to. I didn't used to go to school. I didn't go to school. So that is pretty much it. What is the difference? Well, this is a finished action, right? When you are using the simple past, this is a finished action. And when you are using this semi-modal verb, used to or didn't used to, you're speaking about past routines. In the past, when I was a kid, I used to go to school. Now I don't go to school. But in the past, it was normal. It was like, well, it was my routine. It was what I was doing all day. Every day I was going to school. It was like my normal life. So in the past, I used to go to school. In the past, I didn't used to go to school. Maybe I was homeschooled. Maybe I was taking classes in my house and my parents were my teachers. So I didn't used to go to school. Maybe I am different from everyone else. I don't really have school friends or anything like that. Okay. So this is an extra episode. The only purpose of this episode was to do a summarization. Again, a summarization, or to summarize, it means resumir. Resume in English es otra palabra. Hay una cosa de la que nos tenemos que cuidar, perdón que me salga de tema, que se llaman cognados y falsos cognados. ¿Qué es un cognado? Un cognado es una palabra que se parece a una palabra en español y entonces pues es fácil de entender qué significa, ¿no? Por ejemplo, investigation. Ah, bueno, investigación. Ah, perfecto. ¿Sí? O por ejemplo, no sé, tenemos el cognado real. ¿Qué significa en español? Real. Ah, bueno, muy fácil. Real, real. Ok. Pero también tenemos que tener cuidado porque hay una cosa que se llama falsos cognados. Un falso cognado es algo que parece a una palabra en español, pero en realidad significa otra cosa. Tenemos varios, como por ejemplo actual. Actual o actually. Nosotros pensamos actual o actualmente. En inglés no significa actual ni actualmente. Actualmente se dice currently. Actual se dice current. Si quieres decir actually, significa más bien como de hecho. O en realidad, se usa para corregir información que estaba mal. ¿Sí? Por ejemplo, tenemos otro como fabric. ¿Qué será fabric? Ah, pues suena a fábrica, es fábrica. No, en inglés fabric significa tela. Fabric es factory. Entonces, esos son los cognados y los falsos cognados. Pero bueno, por ejemplo, uno es resume. Resume en inglés significa como seguirle con lo que estábamos. Me paré para comer, hice una pausa, I will resume my activities. Voy a volverme a poner, voy a regresar a mi actividad, voy a retomar mi actividad. En inglés no se dice resume para resumir, se dice summarize. Okay? So the point of this video was to summarize, to make a summarization of the modal verbs and the semi-modal verbs. Now, in the next chapter, we're going to be speaking about other modal verbs for deduction, but they don't have semi-modal verbs. We finished with the semi-modal verbs. Los semimodales solo sirven, tenemos estos de aquí, no estoy seguro si hay alguno más, pero solo sirven para hablar de habilidad, capacidad, permiso, posibilidad, obligación, necesidad, futuro y pasado, nada más. Cuando hablemos de los modales de deducción, de los modales de condición y de los modales de preferencia, ya no va a haber semimodales. Entonces aquí hacemos una pausa, aquí hacemos una raya y aquí marcamos la mitad del tema de lo que son los modales. ¿Ok? Más adelante vamos a seguir hablando de modales, pero ya son otros modales que tienen otras reglas y que no usan semimodales, pero van a usar otras cosas nuevas que estos no pueden. ¿Sí? Ahorita hasta aquí bajamos la cortina, habilidad, capacidad, permiso, obligación, necesidad, futuro y pasado. Ya sabemos cuáles son los modales que se usan para eso. Y también ya sabemos que hay ciertos semimodales que nos ayudan a comunicar ciertas ideas. que no se pueden comunicar con los modales. Aquí bajamos la cortina, de aquí en adelante tenemos otros modales que tienen otras reglas que pueden hacer otras cosas diferentes que estos no pueden, de las que no hemos hablado. Entonces, bueno, espero que estén pasándola bien. Thank you very much. I think with this we will finish and I will see you the next time. Okay?